Hi. Okay. I want to talk about grief today. So, a lot of you might know I left a 7-year relationship last year, and it really brought up so much grief in me. And at that time, a friend of mine gave me a book called The Smell of Rain on Dust by Martin Pretchell, and it's a shaman's perspective on grief. And it actually helped me a lot at that time. It even gave me some practices to really start moving the grief. And what I was seeing this year and last year, especially last year, was there was times where I had so much grief and it ran so deep that I knew I'm not just grieving here for a loss of a relationship or for the loss of a loved one. This is deeper than that. And it felt like I was grieving lifetimes. Like, it felt like it was so deep, so ancient, and so old. And reading this book really helped me get a perspective on grief. And the other night I couldn't sleep, and I was going through a wave of grief. It comes and goes. I've been separated from my partner, for my ex, for over a year now. So we're going into like the second year. And it's definitely, the grief isn't as large as what it was at the beginning, but there is still moments where it comes. And in those moments, there's always a sense of like, I'm just totally alone here, really a feeling of being alone. So when that came up for me, and it was recently, I couldn't sleep and I was going through this. So I took out my journal and I wrote, and here's what came through, and I'm going to read it to you. And a lot of it's inspired by the book. In the tribal communities, when one person was sick, they would see it as a whole community was sick. If one person was sick, then they knew there was a sickness in the whole community. So everyone needed to heal together. The person that was sick wasn't left alone, right? So in this world that we're living in, it's so isolated. We are like, if you're sick, you go off and you get better by yourself. Rather, in the shaman communities, they see it as one person is sick, we're all sick. There's a sickness in the community and we've got to all heal together. In the shaman world, when one person grieved, everyone grieved. They grieved together. They knew if they didn't fully grieve, then the grief that wasn't fully transmuted would stay in a person like a spirit and cause sickness, depression, addiction, and even violence. So the shamans knew grief needed to be transmuted. If the grief wasn't transmuted, that energy would stay around and would carry on. It would stick to the family, would stick to the community. No one grieved alone. Instead, they all grieved together until the grief was transformed into joy or praise. Shaman cultures knew if grief wasn't fully felt, held, transmuted, it gets passed on generation to generation. With each generation, the tribe, family gets sicker and sicker. So when you look at it, if a man loses his dad, say that his dad dies, okay? His dad leaves his body. If that son who's just lost his father can't fully grieve his father, then his father's spirit doesn't really get to move on. It's like his father's spirit stays attached to his son. And then there's this trauma, but there's this grief that has never been felt, never been held, never been transmuted, that stays stuck to the son. And then if that son grows up and then he goes on to have children and he never fully grieves, it gets passed on to his sons. So, and all this unprocessed, unheld grief, when it's not healed, it leads to wars, violence, addictions in the communities. The shamans knew for every life that was taken, the spirit, needed to be fully grieved, or else the spirit stayed stuck to the family. So therefore, we are not our grief. Our grief is so deep because it's been inherited generation after generation. So when you look at it, like, look at your family. my family never got a chance to grieve the losses in their lives. Like my grandmother had, 10 children and 3 of them died as babies. She never got a chance to grieve that. It wasn't allowed. The culture didn't support her grieving the babies that she lost, the children that she lost. So that grief got passed on to her daughters and sons, that got passed on to me. Because there has to be someone in the family that's going to actually be present with this, hold it, feel it, transmute it. We must be the generation that breaks this curse, that breaks the inheriting the grief and just moving it on generation to generation. We must be the generation that holds it, feels it, sees it, transforms it, and transmutes it. So in shaman cultures, when a woman, say a mother, loses her child, she would grieve her child. She would cry, wail, scream, shout, sing, as long as it took, all day and all night, all week if she had to, weeks if she had to. The tribe surrounded her. They supported her. They wailed with her. They sang with her. They cried with her. They sounded. They danced. They drummed. They used their instruments. They supported her. She wasn't left alone to grieve. They would grieve together as one. So this is how we actually, from a shaman's perspective, this is how we actually can move grief. We have to move it together. You see, a lot of us in the world we're living in, we're all like living this like, oh, we're separate from each other. But really, since there's so much collective grief, and grief is just passed on generation after generation, until we collectively come together, feel it, heal it, hold it, transmute it, there's always more grief. There's always more grief because it hasn't been transmuted. So when the mother was done, she would transmute the grief and experience praise. No one grieved alone. We weren't supposed to grieve alone. We were meant to grieve as one. I wrote this. I like that bit. We weren't supposed to grieve alone. We were meant to grieve as one. And this is what I do when I facilitate movement classes, right? I facilitate people to use their breath and use their sound and use their movement to transmute these heavy, dense energies that we've inherited, that are ancestral, that we're holding on to, that we have stuck in our bodies. And really the movement that I facilitate is very shamanic. It's very tribal. And I know the power of that. I know that when I've moved, I've shifted those energies. So when one of us is sick, we are all sick. When one of us is grieving, we are all grieving. When one of us heals, we all heal. So until we are all healed, no one is truly healed. Until we all grieve together, no one has fully grieved. So if you're feeling alone in your grief, please know you're not alone. Find some people who can support you. Find a community. Find a way to move it, to express it. Find people who have the strength to hold you in that. In this world, grief is seen as something that should be, you do it alone in your bedroom and nobody's there, or with your therapist. And it's great to have a therapist you can talk, but if you look at the tribal cultures, they moved, they used their voice, they used sound, they used instruments. And so find that, it's there, there's so many things available now that we're actually starting to come back to these older ancient ways, that and using these old ancient tools of sound, breath, movement, instruments, song, voice, to move energies. And now we can do it in the modern day world. We just bring it into our everyday world, our 20th century world. So I'm going to be doing a somatic embodiment class this Sunday online, and I'm going to be using these tools to transmute grief that we've been holding onto into joy. And this is a practice I've been doing for many years, and it's helped me so many ways in moving these heavy, denser energies and coming back to oneness. You're welcome to check that out. I'll put a link above. And please share this video with anyone you might know that might be grieving, or also share the link to I'll post the book name with a link to the book in the chat. Just because that book, I believe, if someone's looking for a different way with grief, it helped me a lot, and I pass it on to anyone who is going through a lot of grief and helping them with their grief. How can we all help each other collectively grieve together and actually transmute this energy and come back to the true joy underneath the grief? Thank you. Bye.